What up, guys? Welcome back to episode 6 of the Desk Bound Therapy podcast. Today I'm talking with my good friend Danny, everything from social media all the way to fitness mindset to achieve your goals. So he's going to go ahead and introduce himself and tell us how and why he got started on Instagram.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me, David. Pleasure to be here. So yeah, like as David said, my name's Danny. So currently I own the two social media platforms, Top Gym Tips and Physiotrition. I'm currently taking a year out for my study of physiotherapy. I have 2 years left in my degree. What sort of started me on Instagram was I'm a big fan of strength and muscle growth, particularly pertaining to, freighter populations and the effects that strength training can have on them. And I sort of was, studying for a set of exams before, and I was like, geez, like I really wish there was something to keep me, accountable to my studies. And I just found it really hard to study. And then I decided on, creating this Instagram account. And it wasn't for anyone else. And the reason behind it was literally just to keep me accountable for the studies. So I made a pact with myself to post every single day, something to do with physiology, anatomy, something just to keep myself studying. And also, apart from that, I was sort of sick of, the amount of, I guess, BS I saw every single day on Instagram and so much stuff that I didn't agree with. And I guess, David, you probably agree with that as well. There's so much bad stuff out there. So I wanted to put a different spin on things. So yeah, I guess that's where my Instagram journey started. I think it was, April of 2017. So, coming up on a year and 9 months now. So it's been a bit of a journey.
Was your interest in of strength training for frailer populations, did you have that before your interest in physiotherapy, or was it something that sort of stemmed from your studies?
Yeah, so beforehand, I never actually saw the benefits of strength training for a frailer population. So I would have always, thought, when you're older, you shouldn't lift because, you can't move as much, you're stiff. But if anything, I found that strength training helps with those things, and working in hospitals and on replacements, I saw the benefits and the massive improvements. Sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass with aging, is a massive thing we see in older populations. And it has a massive effect on patients' quality of life. What I then started seeing in the research was that, when you apply strength training modalities to elderly populations, not only, do they get stronger and do they increase their muscle mass, but from a psychological standpoint, their quality of life increases. So not only do they move better, and they have less pain, but they also feel better. So yeah, for me, it was when I sort of, got into the hospital setting of working with older people that I saw the absolute crazy benefits that strength training can have.
It's actually interesting because on the other aspect, you have people who are currently strength training and lifting heavy, for example, who I hear it all the time. They want to, once they get older, not lift as heavy because they're afraid they're going to hurt themselves or it's going to be bad for their spine long term, after 40. But really, you can keep lifting long term. It's just another one of those misconceptions.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to, fear mongering. If you look at videos of, I guess, Ronnie Coleman, the bodybuilder, he's had, I think, a bilateral hip replacement, and that's a very big turn off to people. People think, if you lift heavy weights, you're going to have to get your joints replaced. But what we tend to see is the people who are stronger tend to have a lower, likelihood of getting joint replacements. So I think the main issue there would come down to, I guess, technique and load management. People train too heavy too often. They don't account for things like fatigue, because realistically the only cause of injury is an increase. There's too much load on the joint or on the tissue, and the joint or tissue just isn't used to it. So for most people, strength training is going to decrease the risk of joint problems in the long run, not increase it, which is, I guess, a misconception most people have.
What are some strategies you've learned in school for load and fatigue management?
Yeah, so the biggest thing would be to sort of work out, I guess for most people, work out what your, your MRV is. And that can be difficult for some people. So MRV is maximal recoverable volume. And the most practical way I can say of implementing this would be just train as hard as you can for a week or a few weeks until you start to see a plateau in your progress. Then what you'll normally find is you're overreaching. So that means the amount of volume you would have done in the previous week is probably the max you could do. So we want to try and avoid training at our MRV as much as possible. But there are times where it can be beneficial, but they should be followed up by something like a deload week, because we have this thing called an SRA curve. It's a stimulus, recovery, and adaptation. If we apply too much stimulus, our recovery mightn't actually lead to a favorable adaptation. So the best implementation, as I said, is just sort of see where you're at and see how much you can recover from. If you find that you're too sore, like if you find yourself being sore maybe, more than 3 days after a workout, that's problematic, right? So just test around with your volume, and then from there, just stay below that. I don't really recommend training till failure. I focus on an RPE based model, and I try and leave maybe, 2 reps in reserve for most sets. And you can see progress this long term, and you're never sort of pushing yourself too hard that you'll run into major injuries in the long run.
Yeah, it can be pretty difficult for people to want to even take rest days. I know for me, when I started working out, I thought, rest, I'm not going to get results. But really, when you look at the data and you look at the science, all the results is happening while you're resting and while you're recovering. The point is to come back stronger. And often you'll notice when you've been overreaching and you back off, like last week, I felt like I was overreaching. I trained maybe like 6 days last week of heavy lifting. This week, I kind of backed off, reduced the volume, and I feel a lot stronger. So it's really good to know the variables and not be afraid to back off, because you really do feel a lot stronger when you take some time off.
Exactly. And the whole point of the deload week is like people say, I'm not training, therefore I'm going to get weaker. The whole point of the deload week is to make you stronger. So if you do want to get stronger, deload weeks should be, I think, a part of everyone's training. Like for me, I tend to put them in, maybe every 6 to 8 weeks. But all that is for me is it's not necessarily dropping the intensity. It's just dropping the volume by like 50%. So, say I was doing, like 225 on bench for 5 sets of 5 or 6 sets of 5, let's say. For my deload week, I'll still be doing 225. I just do 3 sets of 5. So you're still lifting at the same intensity. You're just giving yourself time to recover. And in the long run, that's going to lead to massive strength increases, which people don't see. Like they just think, I have to work hard every single day. And I think it's about working smarter, not harder, because I see everything in terms of, a long-term game and not just, the next few months. I see this as life. And I think that everybody should sort of, if people start to look at training as from a longevity perspective, you'll start seeing massive improvements, and you might actually I think you'll definitely see better results.
What are some things you can do to implement the deload? Like aside from doing it every 6 to 8 weeks, you could do things like, for those who don't know, you could do things like auto-regulating volume. So something like that is a good strategy. You can do kind of like if you're feeling like you're close to overreaching, you're feeling achy, you're just feeling weak. Like the importance of auto-regulating can't be overstated, but it can also be hard for beginners in the gym. So what would be some tips you have for people who are still kind of intermediate beginner to learn how to auto-regulate their training?
Yeah, so with anyone I do work with, I try and implement an RPE-based model from the start, and I try and hammer home the fact that you need to be able to listen to your body. So if you implement a fairly decent, explanation of an RPE-based model from the get-go, you'll find people are quite in tune with their body. Like I can give somebody a few years worth of lifting experience pertaining to like how their body feels in a matter of weeks if I just sort of tell them, like people, if you give somebody a weight and it's their first time in the gym and you get them, it's a weight that's rough, they can roughly lift for 10 reps and they get to maybe 6 reps and they stop. You can tell straight away that I'll often ask them, how many reps do you think you have left in the tank? And a lot of them will say 1, or they might say, no, that's me to failure. But you can tell by the concentric speed of that rep that they definitely, it's probably an RPE 6 or 7. So I think, first of all, tuning people into the fact of how to effectively listen to your body. So for an intermediate, I guess the best thing to do would be video yourself lifting. And before looking at the video, tell yourself how many reps you think you had left in the tank, and then go and look at the bar speed. And like, it's something that you should notice straight away. If you look at the speed of the first rep and the last rep, you should be able to tell roughly how many reps you have left in the tank. So I think that's a very easy thing people can do. And then, yeah, like the best thing about an RPE based system is the fact that, you never sort of find yourself hitting these plateaus, because it's all based on your perception on that given day, right? So, you could be lifting 225, like you should never have to change the structure of a workout with an RPE based system, because it's all based on how you're feeling on that given day. So even let's say you went out partying or something, the next day you should technically still be able to do that workout. Maybe the intensity would be less, but it's still at a relative intensity of an RPE of 8. So that's why I really love RPE based systems, because, you never have to actually change your programming. And the worst thing for people, what I find, is lowering the weights on them. like, I find that so demoralizing for a lot of people. So say they're lifting like 225 last week and they fail on a rep. And I never want anyone to fail, because I think that can have such a psychologically negative effect in the long run.
Yeah, recently myself just switched to an RP-based training system. I used to primarily just focus on increasing the weights by maybe 5 or 10% a week, but I found you're right, the fatigue was very high there. And with the RP system, it's also good because you learn how to kind of gauge over time what you're capable of and also push yourself close to failure or even a little bit less and be able to back off and still monitor your progress. For example, when I was doing my deadlifts last Friday, I pulled maybe 100 kilograms, 255 pounds around there at around an RP 9. And then yesterday, for example, on my deload week, I pulled two sets of 125 kg around 275 pounds at a much lower RP than the 255 was. So it just goes to show you how fast you can adapt and use these tools to monitor progress.
Exactly. And the thing with, a percentage-based increase, it doesn't take into account how you're feeling on the day. So you can have 12 weeks programmed and you're planning a session 12 weeks from now and you're supposed to hit a specific percentage increase, but you have no idea how you're going to feel on that day. There are way too many variables to account for. So an RPE-based system literally just assumes an RPE-based system just takes into account how you're feeling on that day.
And that's big because there's things like you have to account for, like how was your sleep? How was your nutrition? Did you work it the day before? Are you rested? There's so many variables. So this kind of puts it into a nutshell for you and helps you kind of track your progress in a systematic way.
Exactly. Yeah, and as I said, you're just never going to really run into any plateaus if you do that, because it's just based on how you feel. And it's something that's so simple, but yet so overlooked. You have to be able to listen to your body. If you don't want to run into injuries, you don't want to run into anything that's actually going to stop your progress in the long term, you have to learn how to listen to your body, you know?
So coming into listening to your body, what are some things you do for mobility training?
Yeah, so for me, I guess mobility would be something that's outside of my strength training. Like my strength training would be my sole focus. I think mobility is often overlooked, but at the same time, I think people make too much of a deal of it. But like mobility and strength are closely linked, right? So I guess I'd characterize brute strength as the amount of force that can be produced at a joint, whereas mobility is the amount of range that you can then control a given joint. So for me, in the past, studying physio, I was often told about the benefits of static stretching, foam rolling, other things like maybe like some self-myofascial release using like a lacrosse ball or something like that. I did see benefits, but I often found they were short-term and nothing changed. You know, I'd always still be stiff in those areas. But then what I started to do was look at my training and be like, okay, do I really need to have, for example, let's say I was performing, my main lift would be a bench, a squat, and a deadlift, the three main compounds. Do I really need to have over 180 degrees, let's say, shoulder flexion to be able to do an efficient bench press? And the answer is no. So I was trying to gain strength in certain ranges that weren't functional personally for me. Now, I don't see any negative, I don't really see any negative sides to wanting to be more mobile. I think it's only beneficial because mobility, in and of itself, implies that you're looking to control joint range, not just like the flexibility and mobility argument is like, if you're just trying to get flexible, to me, it means you just want a longer tissue length. It doesn't mean you actually have control over those areas. And what you find a lot of the time is people who are hypermobile tend to actually have increased levels of pain around the body because they don't own those areas. So what I started to do was just implement specific drills to the exercises I was trying to perform. And it may sound completely counterintuitive, but if I want to get a better bench press, well, then I'm going to have to bench press more. And people don't realize if you're training correctly using proper technique, your mobility is going to increase anyways, outside of specific mobility drills. But then again, in terms of specific mobility drills, the one things I will do, I'll do some CARs, so like controlled articular rotations of my shoulders and my hips pretty much every single day, just due to the fact that it will increase nutrition to the joint. And it's nice to take your joints to the end range every single day, at least once a day. And as well as that, I'll do some Jefferson curls, just because I think a lot of the time, especially in the physio industry, we're sort of, told to not load spinal flexion, but our body is meant to be loaded in spinal flexion. Yes, there is a higher risk of injury, but I think to mitigate that risk, you just have to get stronger in that position. So yeah, I do some Jefferson curls every few days, and then I do some cars for my hips and shoulders every single day. And then outside of that, it would just be training the movements, either with using tempo or taking the range of motion slightly further than I'd actually need to. So for example, a squat, I might actually squat ass to grass as opposed to just below parallel. From a performance standpoint, I don't actually need to squat ass to grass. And then, for example, for a deadlift, I might do a deficit deadlift, which again is training the same movement through a greater range of motion. And it will have a carryover to my deadlift, but I don't necessarily, have to do that if my goal is just to get a stronger conventional deadlift.
You make a really good point about people doing mobility for the wrong reasons. And people, I feel like a lot of that comes to, there's so much hype around it. People don't understand what joints they need to load or what areas they need to improve on. It's kind of become like a buzzword. Oh, I need to work on mobility, but you really, really need to, I talk about this in my free ebook, understand what range of motion and what you need to work on to get the best benefits of your mobility. You can't just kind of throw things left and right. You need to understand the purpose and the function. Otherwise, there's no real point to it. Like I myself used to be in that trap coming from a gymnastics background. I had a lot of mobility. I just didn't, or I would say flexibility, and I didn't really have the control. And once I stopped gymnastics, I was always in constant pain in my shoulders just because I had so much range, but I wasn't really pressing overhead anymore. And I didn't do things like horizontal pressing, like bench pressing. So it was just pretty much just doing handstands, a lot of balance work, but we didn't do much controlled articular rotation stuff. So if you look at my current training compared to back then, I used to warm up maybe half an hour of static stretching before any of my lifts, or even my gymnastics training, where now is I'll do 10 minutes of, for example, if I'm benching, I'll do some scapula push-ups, I'll do some banded dislocations, I'll do some back bends on the roller, warm my wrists, and do just a tiny bit of rotator cuff warm-up because I already have that range. And then you're feeling a lot better. It's right, as you do the warm-up sets, you're going to be working your mobility. You can kind of move through the kinks as you're warming up, and I find it a much more effective way to kind of constantly be assessing and reassessing as you're doing mobility and not just going through the range of motions is the biggest takeaway here.
Definitely. And I also think that's a good point. You need to find what works for you as well. So for me personally, I did see short-term benefits to static stretching, but I just never saw anything that actually made any significant change. If static stretching does work for you, go ahead and do it, but I really just don't see any big benefits to it. And also, specificity is really overlooked when it comes to mobility. Why are you trying to get full range in this area? Let's say hips, for example. Why are you trying to get full flexion? Do you need, is that a prerequisite for an exercise you want to get better at? If it's not, maybe you're best spending your time elsewhere. So that's why for me, if I want to get better at bench press, I'll just load that position, because loading that position means you own that position. And that's ultimately what, the most functional sense of mobility is for me, because functionality is completely dependent on the person, and it's completely individualized. So, I might have, a patient in with me who has very limited shoulder flexion. But if they actually don't have any daily tasks that require them to get into full shoulder flexion, well, then why would I try and get them there? You know what I mean? I'd rather get them stronger in the range that they have now. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that, the length of a tissue or the range of motion isn't correlated, or there's no causal link really between that and pain, and that strength is a very protective way of dealing with pain. So I'd always focus on strength first, and I guess the two are then, as I said before, interlinked. But yeah, keep things specific and also find out what works for you. Because I can say the research doesn't seem to suggest that, self-mounted fascial release actually works in the long run. But if you find that it works for you, then go do it, because it's not going to be that detrimental. But please just don't spend 40 minutes, or whatever, 40 minutes flopping around on a foam roller. It's just not worth it. Your time could be spent elsewhere.
That's a really good point. And again, those are, to quickly recap, just making sure you're understanding what you're doing for your mobility. And if you aren't sure, ask for help. Both of our Instagram pages have lots of mobility stretches and exercises. Specifically mine on Desk Bound Therapy, but there's a few we've done together on Top Gym Tips you can check out. So speaking more of Top Gym Tips, why don't you tell us a little bit about your page and some kind of tips for success on social media?
Yeah, I guess the idea for Top Gym Tips started about this time last year. I think we started Top Gym Tips on the 16th of December. So pretty much a day to the year we started the account. And what I found was I just found great success, posting on physiotrition. And what I then decided to do was I was like, okay, there's not many pages that are actually posting at a very high frequency. There just wasn't anybody at the time pushing the same frequency we were, basically, and being consistent with that. So I said, okay, look, to actually take reposts and repost them, it doesn't take that much time. So I got my friend Dylan in and I sat down and I said, look, I have a feeling if we stick to this and we're consistent, and that's the one thing I'd say to anybody, consistency is the main determining factor in success in any endeavor. It's a fundamental principle. I can see this page being big, now I have no idea how we grew to 300,000 a year. It's like, obviously I know, but I just couldn't envision that back then. But what I, did want from the page was to be able to provide value to beginners. I also thought the timing was very good for that because a lot of people we know started in January, right? And then I just wanted to post, let's say 4 times a day. So then that happened. And then within 1 month, we had 10,000 followers. And within 3 months, we had 50,000 followers. And then I guess within now a year, we have 300,000 followers. And the rest is history, I guess. It just comes down to, like, for me, consistency. But then other things, like in terms of growing your social media, you need to be able to get in front of a camera, speak to people. It's not something I push so much on Top Gym Tips because it's more of a brand as opposed to it's more of a company as opposed to a personal brand. But you need to have, you have to have a decent idea about what message you want to get out. So for us, it was helping beginners, and we find most of our followers now are still sort of in that phase. You also need to have a decent phone. Like, that's the biggest thing. Like, I had a very slow iPhone and I just couldn't post. So I invested in a decent phone, like a phone with a camera, just to get the 2-in-1. And yeah, you just need to be consistent. Like, that's the biggest thing people overlook. It's just like, you will grow your Instagram account or your whatever social media or whatever endeavor you do will be successful if you just stick to it. There's no real way to, break that down any further. It's just like, you need to have a vision and you just need to attack it daily. You need to post on Instagram. I'd recommend at least once a day. If you really want to push your growth, try 3 days, 3 times per day for 30 days, and you should see some growth. It's just consistency, to be honest with you, David.
Yeah, I remember when I started out, I used to be a personal brand. It took a while to find my vision, but you have to also, one thing that stuck with me to this day is my why and why I started it. For me, it was, what advice do I wish I know when I started my fitness journey? And I'm still sticking with that to this day. Everything I post is stuff that I wish I knew sooner, that I'm trying to put out there so you guys can not make the same mistakes I made and learn from my successes. So that's really what started it as a personal brand. It was calisthenics, bro, when I used to do gymnastics. Now it's desk mount therapy, and it's still all about just what do I wish I knew? Like, even the posting, you could ask me, like, if you ask me what am I going to post tomorrow, I don't really know. I'm just thinking, what advice did I learn today? What can I share with them tomorrow? And that's been the mindset since 2016.
Exactly. And the why, as you mentioned, there has to be a strong why, because if there's not a good enough reason to do something, to do anything for that matter, we won't do it. So we need to give ourselves a strong reason to stick to something. So that should be the reason that when you want to fall off the wagon, or you're telling yourself, nah, I don't have to do this today, that should be the reason that motivates you to go and do it. So for me, it's just to help as many people as possible who are in the position that I was, like yourself. And what you find is people who have these followings, they just want to reach out to people who they think were themselves, because I saw myself in that situation. There was so much information out there. I didn't know what to look for. So now I'm just trying to relay information that I agree with onto people. And yeah, just hope to reach as many people as possible. And that's what keeps me motivated, keeps me driven to post consistently and stay on top of the social media aspect.
There's so much more we can talk about social media. I think this is a good time to transition because you mentioned understand your why. So I want to go a little bit into fitness mindset, especially as we approach the new year, and just talk a little bit about building successful habits and setting realistic expectations.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing, I have a very specific mindset that I've developed for myself over the past few years that I try and share with anyone I come across. And the first thing I do is set down SMART goals. And it's something that's very simple. It's something that everybody's come across, but people just set goals that aren't measurable, aren't realistic. They don't put a time frame on it. The one thing you'll hear the most of over New Year's or over January is, I want to get fit, or I want to lose a few pounds. How can you take action on that if you can't actually define that goal? So the biggest thing would be, okay, let's say you want to get fit. Well, what does that mean? What do you actually want to do? And what you'll find for most people is they want to lose a certain amount of body fat. Okay, let's make that measurable. Let's say you want to lose 5 pounds of fat. Okay, is that realistic? Yeah, that's fairly realistic for most people, depending on your starting point, obviously. And then put a time frame on that. So let's say 12 weeks. For most people, that's so achievable. But just actually doing that and just setting goals increases people's self-efficacy and increases the percentage chance of them actually completing that goal. I read something before that just writing down the goal, nothing else, just writing it down increases your chance of completing that goal by something like 40%. And that's fascinating to me. Like, it's just like something so simple. It just means you're willing to take action. And then for me, I have this sort of like 4-step process that I sort of, go through in my own head to keep myself accountable. And it's something I really, really enjoy. Like, I've spent the last few years, like fine tuning it. And like, this first step for me is to apply Pareto's principle. So Vilfredo Pareto was a 19th century economist from Italy. And he discovered one of the most, I think one of the most important things that we have in society right now. It's called the 80-20 principle. I'm sure you've heard of it before. But for me and how I apply it to people, it's probably the key to prioritizing what needs to be done and how to get there. And it focuses on working smarter, or working as smart and not as hard as possible. In simple terms, it just means that roughly 80% of all outputs come from 20% of inputs. It just means that a minority can control a majority. So, for example, think of like the richest 2% of people in the world. Combined, they probably own about 98% of the world's wealth. All that means is for you is, I guess, once you set goals, think maybe what are like the 3 biggest actions you can take to give you the best return on investment. So, like, for example, if you want to lose weight, probably the biggest 3 actions that will make up the majority of that goal would be stay in a calorie deficit, keep protein levels high, and track your weight consistently to see if you're actually in a deficit, right? And obviously there are hundreds of intricacies to that. But if you start today and just attack those 3 goals, you'll already be on your way to success. And then something I do to sort of keep myself accountable is I attach emotion to goals. So like we were talking about earlier, there has to be a why behind your goal. Otherwise, you're not really going to want to do it. And then what I do is, so if someone comes to me and says they want to lose a few pounds, or I'll sort of attack their struggles and say, okay, is it maybe because like, do you find yourself having low energy, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe if we attach a different goal, like you're doing this because you want to have more energy to play with your kids. Now that's something that's very powerful. And that's something that actually gets people to stay accountable. And then on top of that, I write down my goals every single day in the morning and at nighttime. And I write them as if I've already completed them. And it's just a psychological thing that helps me stay on track. So, for example, if I say I want to lose 5 pounds, I write that down as I have lost 5 pounds. And for me, that just sort of instills like a positive belief system and makes me feel as if I'm already there. And then I'll start to feel the emotions as if I'm already there without having accomplished the goal. And then like other things I do is I set some wagers for myself. So, for example, if I don't do something, if I don't get a goal done, I will, set like something that I don't want to do. So I remember before, like when I was like 17, I was growing my beard out for a long time, and I was really proud of my beard. And I said if I didn't bench like 225 for my 17th birthday, I'd shave it off. And like it's something really simple, but I didn't hit that, and so I shaved my beard. And it's not self-punishment. It's just like, no, like, it's to keep yourself accountable. And then, after that, I'd just say, the world's your oyster. Once you apply those steps, you start to realize that everything you think is what comes out in front of you. And I know it sounds very like, wishy-washy, but it helps me stay focused that I know that if I apply emotion and I'm consistent, that I will achieve pretty much anything I want to achieve. And I guess that's like my mindset summed up when it comes to anything I do, particularly training.
Have you heard of that principle? You only have so many decisions you can make a day. That's kind of how I base my nutrition. Like I don't track my macros every day. I track it once, maybe a month, once a week. and I pretty much eat just the same thing every single day with some sort of rendition to it. And for me, I'm kind of like going through the motions, kind of eating the same thing. And for me, it makes it a lot easier to stay on target. I'm not a type of person to get bored with a certain food. So for me, that works well. There's a lot of other strategies that can work for some people. But for me, just the consistency is big for me. Just another decision I don't need to make. I know what I'm going to eat. I don't need to go to the gym and stress, oh, what am I going to eat next? I already know. I'm going to go through the motions, and it just works for me.
Exactly. And instilling a routine is something that's so powerful, because if something becomes a subroutine, you don't have to think about it. And as you said, you don't feel stressed about it because you know it's going to happen. It's like external to you. It's going to happen irregardless. So if you do set routines and set plans, like as Jocko Willink says, like discipline equals freedom. People think that it's more difficult to follow a plan. Well, what you find when you follow a plan is that you'll actually have, more freedom to do other things, and more freedom to, like, if you follow a nutrition plan, for example, there's no reason why you can't actually have the foods you enjoy once you control for calories. And people think that you have to be very rigid and you have to avoid all, I guess, like I say this lightly, unhealthy foods, because I don't think any food in of itself is unhealthy, but people often go with this, I guess misconception that you have to stop eating all the foods you enjoy. But no, if you follow a plan and you account for that objectively, you can have all the foods you enjoy and still make a lot of progress.
Yeah, it comes down to that 80-20 principle. If you're consistent most of the time, it's okay to eat out. You just have to understand the concepts of being reasonable and delayed gratification when you eat out. And again, another strategy is having a little calorie buffer. So over time, you learn how to kind of self-monitor these things. Me, for example, I know I eat the same things most days, so I anticipate days like today, for example, it's Friday, I'm probably going to go out. So I'm going to, again, today is my refeed, and I'm using it strategically, not to binge on alcohol, but just to have a buffer to keep the stress low so I can enjoy myself out. And also making wise decisions. Yes, I might want to have some cake, but is it going to be worth it? How am I going to feel later? So I'm a really big fan of delayed gratification for reaching my goals. I want my goals more than I want to cheat, but I also want to live my life. So it's that fine balance that really everyone's working to attain.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I sort of promote flexible dieting for most people, because the general population are at such a stage where, the standard American Western diet is so bad that if you come in with a complete opposite diet, people just won't adhere to it. But if you slowly take away things and instill gradual behavioral change, you'll see much greater benefits down the line. So the lowest hanging fruit for most people is to take full calorie options. So like, for example, if somebody has like a can of Coke every day, that's about 130 calories, maybe 30-40 grams of sugar. If they then just swap it out for a 0-calorie option, they've already, they get the same benefit from that food, but they're consuming less calories. So yeah, I definitely think that's probably the best way to go about it. I don't think telling somebody, oh, you just need to, move less you just need to move more, eat less is a way to go about it. You should slowly instill gradual behavioral change. And you're right, you need to realize there will be sacrifice though. A lot of people, aren't willing to put in the work it takes to get their goals. As soon as they hit an obstacle, they stop. You need to realize that there is going to be sacrifices, but the sacrifices you make should be worth it, because the goal at the end should make you feel happier than the sacrifices make you feel bad, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It can be hard to kind of learn how to do this and implement these things. Mindset is really a hard thing. There's so much more we can talk about. We'll have to have you come back for episode 101 for a little follow-up, and we'll talk about it for an hour about this stuff, because it's just so fascinating. But one thing we'll do is we'll provide some resources in the write-up for this episode of the podcast. You can check out our pages. And again, thank you so much for being on the call today, Danny. Tell them a little bit how they can find your pages if they don't already follow you. That way they can stay in touch with you.
Sure. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, Instagram is the place to find me, at Physiotrition and at Top Gym Tips. If you want to hit me up with a DM, I respond to every single DM with a video message, so you get a personalized response within a day or so. So they're the best two places to find me. But other than that, I guess, David, thanks very much for having me on the podcast. And yeah, as you said, I can't wait to be on again in the future.
All right, thanks so much, for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Deskbound Therapy Podcast. Stay tuned for more episodes. And again, as always, deskboundtherapy.com.